Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Sensible Sessions. I'm Amber Wardell, and today I have with me Michael LaBorn. This is one of my great friends, someone who is not having his first time here at The Sensible Sessions, although the first time he was here was way back in the day when this podcast was audio only. You're listening to The Sensible Sessions. I'm your host, Amber Wardell. Along with my guests who range from experts in their fields to people with incredible experiences and perspectives, our hope is to bring you stories designed to make you laugh, make you cry, or make you think, bringing a sensible approach to a world that's lost its mind. So stay tuned and let's start the show. Michael is a bookish content creator and the founder of Left Unread, a publishing imprint in partnership with Bindery Books. He's focused on creating space for Black and brown authors and pushing back against systemic barriers in the publishing industry. Not only that, Michael is one of my very dear friends and someone who I'm just really, really happy to have here. So, Michael, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. This is one of my favorite podcasts.
Really?
Yeah, I've done a lot of podcast interviews, and yours has stood out.
Oh, well, thank you. It's always so much fun to talk to you, and especially just as someone who is, God, we've known each other for what, 3 or 4 years now? Or it's been longer. It's been a while. We met through kind of deconstruction TikTok.
Yeah.
And then we've sort of morphed through a whole bunch of different topics along the way.
Yeah.
So the reason why I have you on today is a very important one because interestingly, of all the years that we've known each other, our lives have had a very interesting way of intersecting over and over and over again, which I thought was really cool. And where I find it so interesting that they've been intersecting lately is in the publication and author space. The reason why I wanted to bring you on today is you and I have had this really cool intersection of our lives where we're both authors. We're both moving through the publishing industry, both in similar and different ways. And I wanted to talk to you in particular about the way that you're moving through the publishing industry because you're doing it in a very disruptive way. The way I'm doing it is very much in the traditional way, and the way you're doing it is quite disruptive, and I love everything about it. So I was wondering if before we dive in to some of the topics we wanted to get into, could you just talk a little bit about first of all, what Bindery is, and then a little bit about what Left Unread is and what you're doing with it? Today's episode is brought to you by Beyond Self-Care Potato Chips, choosing nourishing self-care in a quick fix culture. If you've ever felt like bubble baths and candles aren't cutting it, this book is for you. Written by a cognitive psychologist, it's full of relatable stories, insights to help you step into your power, set boundaries, and feel truly nourished mind, body, and soul. Links to the paperback, Kindle, and audiobook versions are in the show notes below. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, for sure. Bindery was started by several people who have been involved in publishing for years, Matt Kay and Megan Harvey. They saw that there was a growing movement of book influencers that were changing the industry. A lot of movement for books, for bookstores, for publishers has happened on places like BookTok and BookTube. And they were like, well, why are publishing decisions not in the hands of people who know readers the best? And so they came up with this crazy idea to partner with bookish content creators to start publishing imprints that are centered entirely around our community of already dedicated readers. And so Bindery works similar to a Patreon where bookish content creators are developing a community that are centered around their bookish content, their ideas, their book reviews, things like that. And communities that are larger and dedicated have the opportunity to partner with Bindery to create an actual publishing imprint, which is where I am. I started Left Unread with the specific purpose of creating space for Black and brown authors and to be disruptive. I want to do things in a way that force people to stop and to think about why the barriers that exist and what we can do about them. So that's what we're doing.
And so to that end, can you say, you told me this once before and I just loved it. Can you explain what the name Left Unread means?
Yeah, I was sitting down with some friends and I was like, what are we going to call this imprint? And I came up with a million ideas, but I wanted to encapsulate something that said basically that we're fighting for books that people don't want to pick up. And that's where Left Unread came from. I want to put out the books that people are leaving on their shelves. People are pretending they don't know about, the books that are just not being given the attention that they should be.
And so for folks who may be confronting this idea for the first time, right? For those folks who aren't on BookTok and who aren't familiar with these conversations, maybe like you're just typical person who's walking into Barnes and Noble and is picking up the books that they are most likely to see sitting in the front, like of the new releases, and not realizing, not even really paying attention to the authors or who those authors are. Can you explain what is happening in the traditional publishing industry and why it is so important that an imprint like Left Unread exists?
Yeah, absolutely. The publishing industry is a very small world. It is very hard to get into. It is very hard to develop a career in that industry. And really the only way in is through connections. You have to know somebody. That's how you start working in the publishing industry, which is why it has remained incredibly white. In 2020, there was a major study done, and I believe it was over 80% of publishing professionals across the board, not just the highest level, across the entire industry were white. And since then, they have made commitments to change that, but it's still like 75, 76% white, which you would think would not be a problem because we know black and brown books sell. But in reality, the people who are looking at manuscripts are looking for something that speaks to them, and that ends up causing discrimination that might not be intentional. Sometimes probably is, but might not always be intentional. But because there are not very many black and brown people behind the door making decisions, it ends up looking like black and brown books not getting the same attention, not getting the same amount of access, but also when they come in, they are not being fought for as hard. There are so many black and brown authors who will get a deal because a company is trying to be diverse and inclusive, but they're not getting the same marketing budgets. They're not getting the same opportunities. They're not getting the same spaces on the shelves. Because unfortunately, those stats hold true for bookstores too. So right now we are watching as the publishing industry, which obviously racial discrimination and barriers exist across the entire nation, across the entire world. But the publishing industry is even further behind because it is such a small community that is very hard to break into. And so I think that for me, Left Unread is incredibly important because while I do want to see more black and brown books come out, I think that continues to be important. Until there are black and brown people behind those desks making those decisions, those books will continue to not be fought for with the same energy and with the same amount of resources and passion, honestly.
I think it's a really important point that you bring up because we do so often hear about the fact that there is just overt racial discrimination that happens. I mean, hell, we just saw that video of, I don't know who his name is, but shouldn't even matter, but that idiot who he was like the husband of some Republican, some lady who was getting sworn in, and he refused to shake the hand of Kamala Harris, right? So like we hear about overt racial discrimination, and we less often hear about the kind that we're less consciously aware of. And the fact that just all of us as readers are just consumers of art in general are looking for stories that we can relate to, that feel like home to us. And so as you bring up this point that like, for me as a white woman, who has moved through the world my entire life as a white woman, stories written by other white women with life experiences similar to mine are kind of always going to resonate with me because I'm going to open the pages and I'm going to see words and experiences and stories that feel like home to me. And so if I were behind that desk and I'm seeing that story, I am going to go fight hard for that book because not for any reason other than like, oh my God, this is just really, I remember when I read The Change, it was a book that's all about like reaching your, kind of middle age years and navigating what that's like. I was like, this book is everything because I was starting to go through that. And like, bringing up this point that until you've got someone in that seat of power who picks up a book and says, this book is about my experiences, I'm seeing my life on these pages, and they go and they fight for that, you're right, there's not going to be that same representation. And I think that side of it, that side of the more implicit bias, doesn't get talked about as much.
For sure. And I think that as a whole, we have been taught that we don't have the ability to relate to one another. And while most of us know it's not true, we know that we have more in common than we have against each other. We still move through the world as if that's not true. And I think that definitely goes into professional spaces too, where there are people who pick up books that they probably would relate to if they looked at them harder. But simply because they know it was by a Black author, they're going to think to themselves, this isn't speaking to me. And I think that I think I've been very excited to see as more and more Black books and brown books have come out that have had large market success, that there are more readers who are realizing that exists and that they can find themselves in those stories. But yeah, I'm very excited for a future where there are more Black and brown publishing companies, Black and brown acquiring editors, and just marketing executives, just everybody who was fighting for those stories and making space. Because for me, I want more Black and brown books, but more than any of that, I want there to just be access. I want everybody to be able to chase whatever dream they have.
It's quite interesting, isn't it, how one would imagine that non-white people, Black and brown people in particular, probably always had to try to find themselves in books and movies and stories that don't represent them. And
For sure.
White people now are looking at books that have Black people on the cover, and they're like, how am I supposed to relate to this? This isn't for me because there's a Black person on the cover. That's like, well, I bet you can figure it out, you know? Yeah, I bet you can do it. So
sure.
I wanted to, if it's all right with you, I wanted to pull up on the screen a TikTok of yours that it's one of my favorites. It's one that you posted, I think maybe a year ago at this point, but you recently stitched again. It's one of those, I love all of your TikToks, but this one, when you posted this one originally a year or so ago, I remember like putting my fist up in the air because I thought it was just such a well done TikTok. And I remember like chewing on this one for many days because it brought up many things that, like, you know how sometimes you think you understand a topic, like you think you really think you understand something, and then someone talks about it in a way that you're like, I did not understand this at all. Like it brings just so many new things for you to think about. This TikTok did that for me, and unfortunately it was at someone else's expense. It's just such a good one. Do you mind if I play it for you and then we talk about it?
Yeah, go for it.
Right. So here we go. This is a stitch for our watchers who can see that this is not Michael. So we're going to see another woman who's going to lead off, and then it's going to switch to Michael. Here we go.
Another world-building element that's taken a long time to research is institutionalized racism.
I want to talk about this a little bit, and not for the purpose of dogpiling that author, although I do want to be clear that I will point and laugh as Book Talk does that, but that's not what I'm here for. Because, ma'am, residential schools, institutionalized racism, making humanity, which is likely the demographic that you identify with within your story, the marginalized class, underneath the group of people who are othered, ma'am. But I digress, because as I already said, that's not what I'm here for. What I would like to talk about is the concept of exploring systems of power throughout your story that benefit you in the real world. Because I'm not necessarily on team you should never do it. In fact, I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we would agree that fantasy doesn't exist outside of the exploration of systems of power. And the systems of power that we explore throughout fantasy are reflections of the real systems of power that we experience in the real world, whether as beneficiaries or victims. And I'm not going to say that privileged demographics, in particular white people and white men, should never do that. In fact, I think you should. But I think that you should do that through the lens of your real-world experience with those systems of power. I want fantasy stories with diverse casting and unique magic systems where the hero of the story is watching as the systems of power that they benefit from are being crumbled despite them. I want to see them fighting beside marginalized people and realizing that they are fighting against their own self-interests. Not stories where they save marginalized people, but stories where winning means losing. I want those stories. I want stories where white monarchs are forced to see beyond the mirage of peace that they've erected around themselves, so that they can see the actual experience of oppression that they've caused through their privilege. Not stories that explore marginalized identities, but stories that explore white guilt. Stories that explore the deconstruction of whiteness. And yeah, I know not everybody is going to agree with me that white people should tackle those stories, but let me tell you why I think they should. Because what they're doing right now is they are taking our stories and our identities and they are putting white faces on them and presenting white people as the victims in systems of power that were in fact erected to protect and benefit them. And even though they're not giving their main characters black faces or trying to explore the concept of blackness in their writing, the structures that they're building to oppress their white characters are mirrors of the systems that their ancestors erected to oppress us. What? I don't like it. If you're going to write fantasy, which I hope that you all continue to do, why not tell your actual story? The one where you thought you were a good person until one day you realized that everything around you was built to convince you that you were, while not teaching you to actually be one. The story where you experienced marginalized people and realized what life is like for us. The story where we refused to let you be the hero and you had to stand by and watch us crumble your privileges without your help. The story of self-reflection. The story where you begin as the hero, but at the end, maybe you're not.
Okay, man, that was such a good one. So we both went looking for the original video where she was describing the book that she was planning on writing, and we couldn't find it. So I know a lot of people stitched her video. I think maybe she might have taken it down. But can you recall kind of what she was describing in the original video?
Yeah, I remember a little bit of it. She had created a world where I believe it was dragons, where dragons were oppressing human beings and were forcing them to go into residential schools to relearn. And I don't remember the entire premise of her story. I hope that it was never written. But the thing that really stuck out to me was that she was taking a conversation about slavery and a conversation about residential schools, which is a particularly violent and evil tool that was used against Indigenous American communities in order to tell a story that centered her own identity. I was like, that is just a little unhinged.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do recall when you did your stitch, going back and watching her video originally. And I think one of the things that disturbed me about her video, and I wish we had it to show, was the seeming glee that she seemed to take in talking about this. It was this very, very strange joy that she seemed to take in talking about, you know, the humans in her story suffering. And it's a schadenfreude, this very weird pleasure that she was taking in describing these things that, as you said, are evil. And I just don't think that anyone who ancestrally had knowledge of that, like who had ancestors who had been through things like that, would be able to describe them in that way.
Yeah.
You know, these are sacred stories. And when you give them to people who have no ancestral knowledge of them and have them retell them in that sort of glib way, even when you're just describing when you're just describing what the stories are about on TikTok and you're talking about them that way, it was a very unsettling thing to see.
Yeah.
And so to go back to your video, what I found so interesting about that, and what I love about I'm getting a phone call and my computer was just like, I'm sure you would prefer to just end this recording that we're doing. I'm glad this is you, because like, at least you know me. Like, if this was like some guest that like has never met me before, they would be like, you are a disaster.
Every single podcast that I host goes like this.
Okay. Well, that's good.
I'm very embarrassed of my behaviors.
Then I may leave some of this in, just be like, this was my chaos pod with Michael. What I liked so much about that video, and something that I've always loved about what you do, is that, hold on, well, I'm going to come back to that. One thing that you and I have in common, and I think that we can understand each other about, is that you and I both have an intended audience, right? Like, all of my content, I'm always saying, like, my content is for women. I make it for women to center women. And in the same way, you know, you say my content is for Black people, for brown people. And yet both of us are saying, like, even though we are choosing to center these people and make content that is for those people, we're always like welcoming and inviting people in to the conversation, and just giving people the caveat that, like, you have to understand that the messaging is going to be for the lens of these people.
Yeah.
And therefore, when you hear this messaging, if it's landing wrong on your ears, that doesn't mean that the message is wrong, and we don't need to hear about how the message is wrong. It means the message is not for you. And your job then is to try to understand why this message could be not right for you, and try to have some empathy and understanding toward the people that it's for, right? And so I've always loved that about your messaging. And what I liked so much about that video was that it was very much calling attention to the fact that, like, hello there, this is what happens when the traditional publishing industry that has been pervaded by whiteness has been allowed to tell stories that whiteness does not own. This is what happens when whiteness runs amok within the publishing industry.
Yeah.
And in one way, it created a very, very obvious way forward for Black and brown voices to say, like, you step out of the way. These are the stories that the people who have the ancestral knowledge of these stories need to be telling. But also, there is a way for you to participate in these stories. But you're going to have to do some really, really deep and dark shadow work if you want to be a part of telling these stories. And I thought that was really important and really fascinating. And I wonder how many white authors are willing to accept that invitation.
Yeah. I do hear from a lot of authors who are intrigued by the concept. Even to this day, I get comments on that video regularly. And that's one thing that I do talk about often, because I think it is such an important aspect of bringing change, because I think there's so many elements that need to happen, so many things that have to happen for us to get to systemic change. As you know, like, changing things on a systemic level it's not overnight work. And I think that in the same way that I'm constantly saying we need Black and brown people behind decision-making doors, we also need the people that benefit the most from these systemic barriers to use their positions in a healthy way. Because one of the things that has to happen for us to create space for Black and brown authors is less white authors need to make it easy to keep those stories out. You know what I mean? The more that we have people telling those stories badly and creating a market for those stories to be told from a white lens, the less people are, I don't want to say capable, but willing to hear those stories told honestly. And I also think that, to be completely honest, I constantly say literature has the power to change the world. And I really do believe that. I think every great moment of liberation and every great moment of oppression literature has played a role in that. And I think that as long as we are telling stories that are intentionally talking about systemic oppression through a dishonest lens, we are setting our readers up to become worse people. And so that's one of the reasons that I really continue to throw that challenge out there, because I think we are writing really good stories, enjoyable stories that are setting our readers up to be worse people.
I think I love that you brought up both oppression and liberation, because I feel like a trap that sometimes, especially white people like me, fall into is when we talk to Black authors and I've done it already, right? As we fall into this trap of like, well, let's talk about oppression. And you mentioned liberation, and people like me forget also that there are so many stories of joy that need to be represented in Black and brown authors. And I noticed that that's something that you're doing as well with your bindery, is you're making sure that those stories get represented as well. They're like, Black and brown, in the same way that white authors are, we're not wanting to just tell sad stories of grief and of, things that make us sad. We want to hear happy, uplifting stories as well. And I love that that's something that you're doing too. I don't know why it is that so often, and particularly anytime in white spaces, whenever we want to talk about, let's make sure we're uplifting Black and brown authors as well, we end up talking about trauma stories. And I've just now done it, and so, to point out that fact that there are so many wonderful stories that need to be told as well.
Yeah, there are. And that's one thing I really love about the emerging cozy fantasy genre, is there's so much room for stories that are just joy and happiness. It's one of the reasons that I enjoy romance. It's one of the reasons that I enjoy literary fiction. I think there are so many spaces where we can look at Black and brown stories and just literature as a whole, and just, I don't want to say the word escape, because I think that we have a really bad understanding of what it means to escape in art, but we have the ability to look at the world through the lens of people's humanity and not just through their struggle. James Baldwin said, and this is a summary, but he had said that one of the pitfalls of he didn't call it the trauma story, but of stories like what we're talking about, is that people are so focused on the violence and the visceralness of oppression that they do not see the humanity of people. They're focused on caring about a cause instead of caring about people's humanity. And I think that if we don't have room for joy, if we don't have room for just new life and stories about new love and stories about people who got their white picket fence and are just enjoying their life, where the tension is literally just choosing between two joys, I think without those stories, sometimes we reduce marginalized people to a cause And causes lead to bloodshed. They don't lead to liberation. Not to say we can't ever get behind a cause, but if we are entirely fighting for people because of a cause, in general, that is going to lead to bloodshed, not to liberation. We have to see people's humanity. So I love that you brought that up.
Can you say, I thought this was really fascinating. You said, I don't think we have the right or the best understanding of what escaping in art means. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I think that for a lot of people, reading is just about not being present in their real life, and that's fine. I think it's great sometimes to just, run the bath and grab a glass of wine and read a book. I think that's great. I encourage it. I do it all of the time. But I think that a lot of us are not really aware of what impact art has on us. When we are consuming art, we are consuming somebody's perspective of the world, somebody's perspective of what it means to be a human being. And that does impact us. And I think that when we go into reading not really aware of that and not really challenging that, we end up being shaped in ways that we didn't necessarily mean to be. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think it's something worth being aware of. And I think it's something enjoyable to engage with. I love to go into a book and to ask myself, who is this author trying to turn me into? What are they trying to expose me to? What are they trying to explain to me or show me about themselves? I think that is a fun part of. I'm not just escaping from my life. I'm escaping into somebody.
Oh, I like that. I like how you put that.
Right? That needs to go on a t-shirt.
It does. It does. It's interesting, right? Because we think about this when we talk about like what corporations we are supporting, what brands and businesses we buy from. That's really important. We think about these things, but we don't often think as much about the authors that we're supporting. It seems like we don't put as much thought into that, unless of course we're on Book Talk, but like the average person who's just walking into the bookstore, they're not thinking about who's the author of that, which kind of leads me into the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is your bindery and why your bindery is so special to me and why I want to share it with the audience. Because not only, you're my friend, so of course I care about what you're doing, but I also just think this is such an incredible and important thing that you're doing. And not only are you an author yourself, but you're someone who looked at the world and said, there's a problem here, and I think I can fix it. And I think that it is a good use of my time to fix it, and I'm going to try. And I love stories like that. And I think people need to meet the people in the world who are looking at problems and doing exactly that and are saying, I want to fix that problem. And so what I wanted to ask you about is I wanted to give listeners sort of a walkthrough of the costs of becoming a published author, right? So for me, as an example, I'm traditionally published, which means that I had no costs in publishing my book. Do I have my book here? I wrote this. I said, I need a literary agent in order to get this book published. I went out looking for a literary agent. I sent the manuscript. And one of the first questions was, how many followers do you have on social media? And I was able to share that, and she was impressed with it. And part of the reason why she was impressed with it is because I have big numbers on social media. Why do I have big numbers on social media? Well, partially because I'm good at what I do, and partially because as a white person, my job on social media hasn't been made harder by the fact that systemic barriers are in place for me, right? So already I'm at an advantage there, right? And then I get signed with my literary agent. She takes it to publishers. She starts shopping it around. And the first question they have is, well, how many followers does she have on social media? And they're like, oh, great. Look, she's got a lot of followers on social media. So I get signed because I'm a good writer, partially because of that, and partially because I have a lot of followers. And so already I am crowding out people, partially because of my skill and talent, and partially because of things that already gave me a leg up, right? And now when I sign this deal, I get paid an advance to go finish my book. And then the publisher goes and they make the cover, they print it, they market it, they put me in touch with a PR company that gets me in touch with people to promote the book and all of these things. And then I wait for royalties to roll in. That's my process with this book. Now that process for a self-published author is totally different. Yeah. And someone who doesn't have the privilege of having a large social media platform is already someone who's most likely going to be looking at self-publishing, because it's going to be very hard to go the traditional publishing route if you don't already have a platform. Well, if you're like me and you're nonfiction, I know it's a little different if you're in fiction. And that's not to say that like there are plenty of people who are choosing to go the self-published route just because that's the preferable route for them. So I don't mean to paint this as though self-publishing is like the route that people go when they can't be with a traditional publisher. All that to say, as you go down the traditional publishing route, there is $0 spent by the author. And on the self-publishing route, there is a lot of money that has to be spent, that has to be available to you upfront, that you have to lay out. And what you're doing as an imprint who is working to get Black and brown authors' books published is you are fronting that money for them. You are taking on those costs for them. And so I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about what are the costs for an author who would be trying to self-publish their book that you are going to end up taking on for them by bringing them in to Left Unread and signing them with your imprint.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, it's going to vary from person to person, and it's really going to vary depending on how connected they are, because there are a lot of resources that exist within the indie author community, but that's not something that most people coming in with their first book knows about. But just editing alone in general for a full-length novel is going to cost you several $1,000s. And that's obviously, once again, there are plenty of editors that work at lower rates. There are newer editors. There are editors that will create payment plans. But in general, that's not something that people have access to until they've, been in the industry for a while and gotten to develop relationships and they know people. So most people are having to find several $1,000s out of pocket or skip it entirely, which we know that does happen. And for a good cover that is going to attract people and pull people in and really get your vision covered, you're looking at $500 to $1,000, sometimes more than that. I know people who have gone through the entire necessary process and they have spent, $1,500 because they found the right editor and they found the right graphic artist who wanted to work with them. But usually it's more like $5,000 or $6,000, and that's before we're ever looking at how to market a book, before we're ever looking at developing your website and figuring out where you're going to promote it, and Amazon ads and Goodreads ads and TikTok and Facebook ads. It can get very, very expensive very fast. And while it is absolutely possible to do a lot of marketing organically, that's not the average person's road to success. So it's a very expensive process to develop a thriving career as a self-published author. Having said that, obviously there are many people that do it, and it's a very valid form of publishing. I'm a fan, as we both know. I love self-publishing, and I think some of my favorite books I've ever read have been self-published. But I appreciate you acknowledging that it's very expensive. It's very expensive. It's one of the things that I was most excited about with partnering with Bindery, is that they have a commitment for fighting for those authors. And like you said, there are plenty of authors who are self-published because they want to be. And I would never try to convince somebody to not do that. I think I love the amount of control that you have as a self-published author. But there are authors who are self-published because they were not able to take another route. And so I love that this door is open for us to pick up those costs and to help people. And one of my eventual goals with Bindery, as I am building my community and my paid subscriptions, is I'm hoping that I will be able to just throw resources at indie authors that I'm not signing, because I can only publish so many books. But I would love to be able to just throw resources at indie authors. If I can talk for a second about one thing we're doing in my Bindery, is my community has decided that we are going to partner with an indie author like once to twice a year. And we're going to throw all of our platforms behind them. So we're going to sit down with them with a couple of pretty successful authors and say, hey, what's your marketing plan? Let's figure out a good plan. And then all of the creators in my Bindery are going to throw our platforms behind, raising the money they need for their project, are going to be pushing their pre-sales, helping them get all the things they need to make their books successful. And Left Unread's not going to have our name on that. The whole goal is just to use our platforms to help authors. So yeah, it's expensive, but there's so much community there that I think that it's such a beautiful experience to watch as people who everyone has counted out just excel.
That's amazing. I love that it's bringing this community aid element to it. Are you still here?
I dropped my phone.
This is so much chaos. I love it so much. I love that you're bringing the mutual aid to it, and that it's really, it's like, on the one hand, there's Left Unread, which is like a full-on imprint that is, signing authors on and you are going that full route, right? And then also it's community aid. It's, hey, let's all come along and support and uplift each other. And I've always believed that we are all going to do our best when there are multiple routes to the same end goal, right? And you touched on this a second ago. For me, the traditional route was the one that made the most sense because I don't know how. I'm not a graphic designer. I'm not very good at design. So like the thought of trying to create a cover sounded insane to me. I am not detail oriented enough to try to edit my book. Like there are many things, many skills that I lack that I knew I could not be trusted to take care of in order to do that, right? And so to me, I was like, I can write the book and then I need to give it to someone else to handle all of the practical details. And so that was traditional, was like the most realistic route for me. But I had Desiree Moore on my podcast 2 weeks ago, who she wrote one of my favorite books of all time, which is untitled for now, self-published it. And she said, a traditional publisher could offer me millions and I would not take it for any book. She said, but that's because I love the process of designing my cover. I love the process of editing and all these things. And she was like, I would not thrive under a traditional publisher. And so there should be multiple paths toward entering this space. And so I love that folks like you are coming along and saying, hey, let's think creatively about how to open doors. Let's think creatively about how to make the most access and the most different types of ways for access so that everybody who wants to can come to this space.
Yeah. I think that's the win, is when we get to a point where it's not traditional publishing is better or indie publishing is better, but it's everybody just has a choice. They can do what they want. Neither path is for everyone. There are, so like for me, I'm a control freak. I would struggle so hard with the thought of not being involved in every part of the process. But also, I know people that don't have the skill set to manage everything that needs to be done, and like that's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with not having a skill set, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to be involved in every part of the process. It's just what path fits your skill set and your needs.
Yeah. For me, like my favorite part, and this is for anything, this is when I go to the hair salon to get my hair cut, when I go get my nails done. My favorite thing about working with creative types, because even though I'm an author, I don't consider myself a creative type. I am like a type A Capricorn. But when I love working with creative types, I will come to them and I will say, I trust your creative process. Please do what you feel is best. And I give them my hands, or I give them my hair, or I give them my book cover, and I say, please go with your creative spark. And I always get the very best things because I'm entrusting the creativity to the person with the creative skill that I don't have. Right. And so that's why I went the traditional route. But like if I had that skill as a Capricorn, if I had that skill, best believe I would be the one needing to do it. So it really goes back to there needs to be all of these options. And I love that you're providing that. And again, I'm so inspired by people who say there is a need and I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to figure out how to meet it. And I love that Left Unread is doing that. And speaking of that, are you able to, because I know we're starting to run out of time here, can you please tell folks who are listening how they're able to come and support Left Unread? I support Left Unread. It's very easy to do. There are ways to set it and forget it. And then there are ways to also be like super duper involved. So can you tell people how they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We are a community-led and a community-funded publishing imprint, so we do everything together. My goal, I'm a very transparent person. I like to talk through what I am doing, what our projects look like, where we're headed. I like to talk through all of that with my community. So the number one way that you can support what we are doing is to subscribe to my Bindery. It is similar to a Patreon, but it is specifically focused on bookish content and on publishing. So you can subscribe for free and you will get access to all of my bookish content. I post 3, sometimes 4 essays a week, and they are all usually big topics. I range from things that are teaching you how to write better to talking about my favorite books to talking about how to read more consciously. So whether you're a reader or writer or you don't care about either, there's probably something I'm talking about that will interest you. But you can also just subscribe and not engage. That's fine too, because the primary goal in those subscriptions is when those books come out, I want you to have access to them. I want you to buy them right away. I want you to talk about them. Once again, it is harder to push Black and brown books in this industry. So having a strong community of people who are ready to support them makes a massive difference in these authors' success. So come be a part of that. And if you have the budget, you can subscribe for $5 or $12 a month, and half of that money is going right into a fund to help us fund those projects, and the other half of that goes towards what I am paid for the amount of work that I put into it. So you can come and support us through a monthly subscription, or you can subscribe for free once again and just buy the book when it comes out.
I'm going to be putting the links to Michael's bindery called Left Unread in the show notes, as well as in the description box below, so that you guys can go and subscribe and support. I highly recommend that you do that. It's a wonderful, wonderful community. I also recommend that you follow Michael on Instagram. All of his socials will be linked down below. He does send out DMs frequently on his channel, which I do follow, so that you can get updates to know when new blogs and things are coming out. There's also live events and things which are really cool that you can go be a part of. It's just a really, really great thing. I think that of all the people who I follow who do live events and who are building community, I've noticed that you're one of the most engaged in terms of really, really engaging with the community, which I think is really cool. And so I hope that my audience will go and take advantage of that, especially the bookish folks who are here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I hope you all come.
So Michael, before we go, I know you've recently signed a brand new author. Can we hear a little bit about that and the book that's coming out in, I believe you said October?
In October, yeah. I'm so excited about that. Her name is Elaine Ho. She is phenomenal. And I knew I was going to sign this book before I finished the first chapter. This book follows a woman who has been conscripted into service for a neighboring nation, who has been fighting for their liberation from a colonial power for about two generations. And in order to kind of win back their freedom, they have started to pick up the tools of their oppressor. And they have started conscripting warriors from their neighboring nation. And at this point in the story, this woman has been a warrior for all of her life, and she comes across a little girl with supernatural power who could change the entire tide of the war. But she is determined to not let her become a weapon for this kingdom that has forced her to be one. And so the whole story follows her not really wrestling with how do we fight for liberation when we're using oppressive tools, and what does it mean to actually fight for my freedom? Like, who is actually the victim of war, and can I actually fix this from within, or do we need to burn the whole system down? It is a lot of the questions that we are asking ourselves right now as we're watching the world fall apart around us. So when I was reading this, I was like, I have all of these questions. So Elaine, answer them for me. It's incredible.
That is amazing. That's super. Did you say the title and I missed it? What was the title of it?
It is called Cry Voidbringer.
Cry Voidbringer. Oh, what an amazing title.
And if you're one of my paid subscribers, there's a cover concept available in my bindery.
Can you say that one more time? The audio cut out.
I said, if you're one of my paid subscribers, there is a cover available in my bindery.
Ayo. Okay, so guys, you gotta go and make sure that you're subscribed so you can check that out. I will be checking out that book because that sounds amazing. I think that all of us need to be reading stories like that right now for, as you said, many reasons. Well, Michael, thank you so much for being on today. I just adore you so much. I love what you're doing professionally. I love what you're doing as a person. I love you as a person. You're just one of my favorite humans, and I'm just very honored to be your friend and very thankful that you took some time out of your day to come and speak with me and speak with the audience, and I just appreciate you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, and I feel the same way.
All right. I'll see you next time, Michael.
Bye.
Bye-bye.